Hello, and thank you for joining us today on our webinar on FSC certification for small and community woodlands. In today's session, we plan to cover what FSC certification is, why it could be relevant for your woodlands, and how to become certified. So I'm Amy Willock, the Outreach Manager at FSC UK. Joining me today are Amanda Calvert from Small Woods Association, Maria Wilding from Clytie Haldwick, and Woodland licence holder Andy Brown, all of whom will share the potential benefits of certification could bring. So hopefully we'll also be joined by Paul Sandys, Director of KFCG for a certification group, an FSC certified group scheme. So Paul will hopefully be able to provide details on the practicalities of certification and becoming a member of the group scheme. So just a bit of housekeeping to start off. If you could please use the Q&A function to ask any questions. If your question is directed at a specific speaker, please state this as you ask the question. We plan to have at least 30 minutes for questions and discussion after all of the speakers have presented. So please ask your questions as we go along. Please also be aware that it will be a recorded session to share the presentation sections onto our YouTube channel for those who could not join us live are able to access the information. We do not plan to share the Q&A section. You should all be on mute now. If we could please ask you to remain muted throughout the event. If you are having any technical issues, please let us know via the comment box and my colleague Rachel will try to help. So to start off, I'll provide a quick overview of FSC and what forest management certification covers. So FSC is a global organisation established in 1994 with a mission to promote environmentally appropriate, socially beneficial and economically viable management of the world's forests. FSC UK is an independent national office which pursues FSC's mission at the country level. So FSC's vision for 2050 is that resilient forests sustain life on Earth, and where the true value of a forest is recognised and fully incorporated into society worldwide. So we can summarise our mission and our vision as forests for all, forever. So overall, there are FSC certified forests in 89 countries around the world, covering 220 million hectares, and in the UK, some 43% of the woodland area is certified. So we are a global community that brings people together with diverse interests to set global benchmarks for forest stewardship. We are governed by our members and have a chamber-balanced democratic structure, and that is based on equal weighting of economic, environmental and social voices. So ultimately, FSC is about compromise and balancing the different needs and demands on our forests. So in the simplest terms, FSC Forest Management Certification means two things: managing your woods according to a specific standard, and an independent third party checking that you are doing so. At the global level, FSC's vision of responsible forest management is set out in international principles and criteria. So our principles and criteria ensure that economic, environmental and social elements of forest management are covered and given equal importance. So these look at issues such as legality, workers' rights, indigenous people's rights, community benefits, the economic viability of the forest, environmental values, protecting areas of high conservation value, and management planning. So standards are developed that are adapted to a national context. So in the UK, for example, our standard doesn't cover indigenous peoples, but maybe has more of a focus on issues such as species composition, access rights, and pesticide use. So in the UK, FSC Forest Management Certification is based on the UK Woodland Assurance Standard, also known as UPWAS, or shortened to UPWAS. So the first edition of UPWAS was approved by FSC International in 1999, making it one of the longest established national forest stewardship standards in the world. The standard is revised regularly and a fifth edition is currently in development. So now thinking why FSC certification is valuable for small and community woodlands. So we know that small and community woodland managers value and manage their woodlands for a wide variety of reasons. So this could be as areas as filled with wildlife, as places to work or teach, or as somewhere to play, or as a legacy for future generations. So we also recognise there'll be a variety of reasons why you could be interested in certification and why you've joined the session today. So shortly I invite Amanda, Maria and Andy to talk about the reasons they consider certification relevant to smaller community woods. But in very general terms, certification might provide you with personal assurance that the work you are doing will preserve all of those things that you value so much in your woodlands. This could be around management practices that aim to conserve wildlife, or for the health and safety of any forest workers, for example. And it can also provide important assurance to others, such as landowners, the wider community, or potential funders. And also, if you are selling forest-based products, you might find that there are marketing or financial advantages. So it could be that FSC certification might give you greater access to markets for wood products and potentially to markets for non-wood forest products. So also through FFC's verification of ecosystem services, it's now possible to provide greater assurance around specific benefits generated from your woodland management. So this procedure enables forest landowners, smallholders and communities to verify their impact on specific ecosystem services and make claims about these. So our approach focuses on 5 services: biodiversity conservation, carbon storage and sequestration, watershed services, soil conservation and recreation services. The aim of this is to recognise the multiple values responsible forest management provides and help forest managers derive value for actions taken to maintain or enhance forest ecosystem services. So now we'll hear from the first of our speakers. So I'll pass over to Amanda from the Small Woods Association.
Morning. And I'm just going to apologise now because the postman's just arrived and my dogs will probably bark, which is really bad timing. Yeah, so our woodland owners generally own between 0.1 and 10 to 20 hectares of woodland, and the majority of them have some sort of loose management plan or ideas about how they want to manage their woodland, and always have done. However, over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, we've seen an increasing interest in owners wanting to formalise that management and put more structure to it so they can enhance what they do, and then also to illustrate that they are managing with best practice in mind. And they've also shown an increased interest in different types of certification to show how that they can prove this in terms of their management. So most of them have one of their primary objectives as improving biodiversity, but a number of them also have to provide an income from that woodland to help support their management. So having the certification also helps them enter into markets and provide people that are purchasing any products they sell with a little bit more confidence. So I think that we've held a number of meetings about certification, and we get an increasing number of people attending with each event, and then we get a lot of interest following that. So subject to that, we've just gained some funding to help support our members to become FSC certified, and we're getting a lot of interested in joining in that project, and also to look along the lines as Amy just suggested about FOC ecosystem services, because this is essentially what they're interested in. They're interested in how they can improve their habitats in their woodlands, to improve habitat networks, to support wider landscape ecosystem services, but also how they can link up with adjacent landowners. We've got a number of woodland owners that are have purchased their woodland as part of a broader sale of a breakup of woodlands. So we have a lot of them that are talking to their neighbours as well. And I think that they really appreciate the idea that they can prove to people through a certification that they are doing things in a well-managed way. A lot of the issues with becoming certified have been the cost of becoming certified, and also getting management plans approved, because a lot of them fall below the requirement in terms of obtaining grants. They have difficulties in actually obtaining any money and funding to support any management plan production and any approved management plan production as well. So as an organisation, we actually actively support our members in producing the management plans and helping them to get them approved. I think that in the future, more and more of our woodland owners are going to go down this line. So I've got a few questions to ask later on in terms of how we can reduce the costs of certification, and mainly it's the cost of auditing for certification that are critical, and that's what's holding a lot of our members back.
Brilliant, thank you, Amanda. So now I'll just turn over to Maria. So Maria is from KFCG.
Hello? It's not letting me turn my webcam on. Hang on.
Yep, we can hear you, Maria.
There we go. Oh. Yeah, I'm just trying to turn my I might have to just leave my webcam off because my internet's a little bit unstable.
That is fine, don't worry.
So yeah, I'll just start. Okay, so yeah, I'm Maria Wilding from KFCG. KFCG, translated into English, means Voice of the Woodlands. So we are a network organisation of community woodlands in Wales, and we support just over 100 now communities who manage their local woodlands with and for their communities. And we describe a community woodland as any woodland where the local community has some input into the management of that woodland. So that can just be on a purely administrative level, or potentially clearing footpaths, keeping footpaths open and doing basic work, up to managing hundreds and hundreds of hectares of woodland that local communities raise money to buy. So we've got a huge range of different organisations, but the main common factor is that the social aims and the social benefits are the important things, as well as the range of other kind of benefits that managing a woodland can bring. But the main thing is that those benefits stay locally and stay within that local community. And so our 100+ members only manage, it's not a huge proportion of the woodland and forestry in Wales. It's something like I think we're coming up for 5,000 hectares of woodland managed at the moment. So it's not huge, but it is a significant proportion of the woodland in Wales, and it's growing. Has never, I think, been as much interest in local people taking an interest and wanting to have a say in how their local green spaces and how their spaces are managed. And that's one of the things we're seeing, is that translates into many different wishes, I think, from the woodlands. So the benefits that people are interested in from woodlands are the health and well-being aspects, the recreation, the access, but also utilising the timber, making sure that the products and the services that are offered from those woodlands are sustainable and have value locally, as well as regionally and nationally. So our quite small sector of the community, one of the things that we're very keen and we've always been pushing for from our members and for our members, is that community management of woodlands is a valued and integral part of the forestry sector as a whole. And that's something that is becoming more and more accepted. And yes, we're never going to be a huge part of the forestry sector, but we're an important part of it nonetheless. And we should be able to access most of the things that the other parts of the forestry sector do. And one of the things they've been working on with FSC and with Small Woods Association, and also with the Community Woods Association Scotland, which is our sister organisation, is looking at how we can make certification more accessible for small and community woodlands, and how we can remove some of the barriers. So we've been working for quite a few years to look at how this might work. And one of the, as both Amy and Amanda have said, the reasons for community woodlands wanting to access certification, to be able to access certification, are possibly slightly different. They want it's the validation really of what they're doing and the ability to evidence that to a range of different people. So we've got being able to evidence it to funders, to landowners, to the wider community that yes, communities can and do manage woodlands to a really high standard, and with added benefits. So I think one of the things that we've had a lot of interest in from our members, and particularly to start off with from possibly some of the larger community woodlands who have more capacity to be able to access is to the certification, is to become part of that, either as a group scheme or as a looking to somehow facilitate a group scheme ourselves. So we're in the process of trying to see what option would work best for our members, whether there is a kind of easy way in, if you like, for a pilot scheme for community woodlands, and whether it's something that we work with on just a community woodland basis, or we work together with Small Woods Association, or whether we access, like, is it KFCG? I think Paul Sandys, who we've talked to in the past, whether there is a way to integrate community woodlands into existing group schemes. So as with Amanda, we've been looking for funding for the last couple of years to pilot some kind of facilitated group scheme for community woodlands. And I think we've hopefully, fingers crossed, we may actually have something starting up in January. But so my job kind of between now and then is to figure out what's the best way to do that, and what is the ultimately we don't want to set up something big and not be able to sustain it. So what is the best way to start on a small scale, test the waters and see what's the best route in for community woodlands? And I think, yeah, as Amanda, I might have some questions in the discussion for various people afterwards. So yeah, hopefully that's given you a flavour of why we're interested on behalf of community woodlands, and yeah, happy to take any questions later.
Brilliant, thanks. And it's good to hear that you both have questions ready for our session later. So now if we just pass over to Andy Brown, who is a woodlot licence holder.
Hi. Hi, can you see me okay? Yeah? Hear me? All right.
Yep, we can hear and see you.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for having me along. I hope I'm in darkest Dumfriesshire in South Scotland, so my broadband is not the best. So hopefully this will come through okay. I need to explain quickly first what a woodlot licence is, because people probably might not know what that is. It's probably best described as allotment forestry, as some have called it. So basically, the idea originates in British Columbia, where they have really big, massive industrial forestry, but they had a recognition a long time ago that they needed to provide an opportunity for local families and local people to get tenure of forest land as well. So they started the woodlot licence programme back in the 40s, late 40s, which meant that local farmers mainly, but also other people, could take on the management of a bit of their local woodland and manage it to produce small amounts of timber and other sort of forest products. And about 10 years ago, a group of foresters in Scotland looked at this, because we were looking at forest land ownership in Scotland, and that it's very concentrated and there isn't many opportunities for local people to get forest tenure themselves. And we thought woodlot licences were a great opportunity. So since then, about 10 woodlot licences have been set up in Scotland. And I'm lucky, me and my family are lucky enough to have one at Calaverick Castle, which is on the Solway estuary, Solway Firth, and we've got about 30 hectares of ancient woodland there primarily, that we managed to an agreed management plan that we put together for the estate, and we take out, you know, small amounts of firewood every year, small amount of timber that we either use ourselves or we sell on to local firewood merchants. So the woodlot licences tend to be on a wide variety of different types of woodlands. Some are on conifers, some are on hardwoods. They tend to be quite a variety, tend to be quite small woodlands. So far, they've all been on private estates, as opposed to British Columbia, where it's on state land, crown land, as they call it. And generally, people that have taken the woodlot licenses on over the years have tended to be small scale contractors. So we've had guys who are, like one's a small scale sawmiller, so he mills the wood on site and then sells it. We've got a horse logger who uses it as a sort of base for training as well as producing timber. And we've got guys who have small contracting businesses, so they've got a wee forwarding trailer on their tractor, so they use it as part of their, they're producing timber for sale as local firewood. So that's the kind of thing, and also folk are producing loads of timber for sale. They sold loads to local sawmills for for timber wagons in and stuff like that. So so that's a kind of brief introduction. So it tends to be quite hands-on guys, sort of chainsaw guys and girls, basically, who take them on. What we've sort of learned over the last few years particularly is that woodlots are not in isolation. They're part of a wider forest industry. And things have changed over the years, particularly, you've had FSC, you've had various other things come into being over the last few years. And there's an expectation about standards, which are important. And what woodlot licenses are high standard forestry, and we're keen to prove that. And so part of that is why we're wanting to do certification, is so we can show people that we're working to a high standard. And also, as a forester, I'm a forester on an estate myself, as an independent forester, and I get a lot of support from being FSC certified. So I get an audit every year. We are part of the Scottish Woodlands group scheme on the estate that we're in, and we get a lot of, or I get a lot from that, and just the process of managing the forest to meet the standards is a really positive one for me. I actually look forward to my audits, and particularly when you're working in isolation, it means that you're getting up to speed with what's happening more widely in the industry, if you see what I mean. And actually, that would be really good for woodlot license holders as well, because often they're working in isolation. I mean, often they're part of a wider group, or quite often there's a cluster of woodlots. But even so, I think having that auditing, going through that auditing process could only be a good thing. And I think, as I say, standards are going up all the time, which is how it should be. And it's it's to keep up to with those standards and how things are changing and what the expectations are. And particularly when your woodlotters are pretty hands-on chainsaw guys, stuff like that they need help with. They need help with keeping up to date with paperwork and making sure you have the right grid references and all this kind of stuff on your site plans, and all that kind of stuff is quite detailed and quite specific, but it's something that is often picked up on an audit. So we've been looking at various options, and it's really interesting what other people have said about funding, and that's what kind of what we've run into, because when you're working on woodlots, they're not making money really, or not very much money. They're pretty much, if they're covering the cost of your time, or at least some of the cost of that time, then you're doing pretty well. You're not making much on it. So yeah, cost is a big one. So we originally were thinking, well, what we could do is, if we could have got funding, is we could have set up our own group scheme, because we've got guys who've got the skills to do that. But what we're looking at now is trying to join an existing group scheme. We've had some discussions with Paul, actually, I think he's maybe there. But it was funding has been the kind of stumbling block, really. We didn't want to set too many hairs running until we actually got somewhere with funding first. And actually this week we've just heard that we probably have got funding, at least for to get the ball rolling and maybe get 1 year's worth of certification. So that's kind of where we are with it, and it's interesting to see what other folk think.
Great, thank you, Andy. So, I mean, I think that was really interesting to hear the differences and potential benefits from the different organisations, and also perspectives from England, Wales, and Scotland, but also to hear those common reasons of validation, assurance, guidance, and integration into the forestry sector and markets. So, also interesting to hear the common barrier of costs, which is something that we can discuss later. So. Now we just move on to how forest management certification works. So for the purposes of this discussion, community woods can include any woods owned by a community or managed by a community under agreement with the landowner, similar to what some of our speakers have already outlined. There is a formal FSC threshold for small woods, which allows them to benefit from a lighter auditing intensity, which in the UK is set for 500 hectares. But that has more to do with a low perceived risk of non-conformance with standards than what is a generally small wood in our national context. So here we are thinking more of the thousands of privately owned or managed woods up to around 10 hectares to 25 acres in size. So achieving FSC certification depends on conforming to the requirements of UCWAS and on having that conformance evaluated by an accredited independent certification body, such as Control Union, SGS, or the Soil Association. So UCWAS is divided into 5 sections that cover legal compliance, management planning, woodland operations, natural, historical, and cultural environment, and people, communities, and workers. So for someone new to certification, UCWAS might look a bit daunting, but the requirements of the standard are actually relatively short, and a lot of the text is guidance to help you conform or examples of evidence you can use to demonstrate conformance, an example shown here. And there is also a separate UCWAS appendix which lists a lot of useful best practice guidance. So while it is possible for a smaller community wood to be covered by its own certificate, it is likely to be much cheaper to join a group scheme. So that's what some of our speakers have already kind of outlined as well. So in a group, a number of individual members are covered by a single group certificate. The largest group in the UK has nearly 400 members, but there are actually bigger groups in other countries. A group scheme manager will carry out internal audits to ensure standards are met. And group scheme members will be audited on a sample basis by a certification body. So next I'll invite Paul to talk about the realities and costs of joining a group scheme. And we're also joined by Nicola Brennan from the Soil Association, who can hopefully answer questions on external auditing by a certification body, or also perhaps about the realities of getting your own certificate or setting up your own group. So as our speakers have discussed, we've been having different conversations with Amanda, Maria, and Andy about the possibility of setting up new groups or joining existing groups and working out what could be best. In most cases, we would recommend talking to more than one group scheme manager to get the best fit for your circumstances and the best value for money. And all contact details of our group scheme managers can be found on the FFC UK website. So I'll now pass over to Paul.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay, well, just a little bit of background. KFCG started in about 2012 with 16 group members, and we've steadily sort of grown year by year to the point where now we have about 156 group members. Predominantly they're commercial woodlands. They're quite large in size, and the smallest forest that we have, or woodland, is about 13 hectares. The average size is probably around 300 or 400, and therein lies one of the problems with the affordability. So the majority of the group members are making decisions to become certified purely to be able to access timber markets. There are some that have different objectives, and we do have 3 community woodlands where in most cases the timber revenues cover the costs of their certification, and the reason they've become certified generally is in order to access the timber markets. I mean, the biggest difficulty I think the smaller woodland owners face is in understanding compliance and best practice, and you know, getting together the various records that are needed as the, you know, as the verifiers within UCWOS. We've tried to work out how we can make things cheaper, but we can't. We're a commercial business essentially. There's two of us that operate the group, myself and Phil Webb. We're both equal directors, and our starting prices for group membership are at £750, and they rise according to the size of the woodland that applies. And generally we're dealing with one manager, so if they're lacking in certain records, or perhaps they need a bit of help in understanding how to comply with UCWOS, we provide records for them to do that through templates that we've created specifically to help them record things, you know, to comply with UCWOS. The difficulty, I guess, with small woodlands is that there's different owners who potentially could collectively, you know, produce a management plan covering that group of ownerships. But when it comes to auditing, that's where it starts to get a little bit complicated, because which manager do you see, and which and the different managers or owners rather may want to keep different types of records. I'm guessing that the best approach might be a little bit like the pilot projects in Ireland, which Phil Webb and myself were involved with setting up and preparing records for them and auditing them, but they were then all agreed to use the records that were prepared by the group. So there was a kind of standardized approach to the record keeping. That's not something that we do as a group. Our aim is to bring group members into the group, but where there's multiple owners, I can see that that's where we have difficulties. We tend to want to deal with one person who then would potentially have an oversight over the woodlands that are under that individual membership. We have some ownerships which involve multiple properties. For example, we've got the Wildlife Trust within the group. They have about 13 forests, but they all share one common set of management aims and objectives. And we deal with one point of contact, but of course when we go to audit the Wildlife Trust, we might you know, interview different, you know, trust staff and workers, etc., in order to, you know, for them to demonstrate the compliance across their membership. So yeah, I don't know if there's a lot more I can help on that. I mean, we're set up really as an independent of management, so we don't actually get ourselves involved with management planning. We don't get involved with operational work, or we don't manage the forests themselves. We're just there really to facilitate, you know, membership of the group, and we hold our members' hands where we need to help them understand what it is they need to do in order to comply with the requirements. As a rule, we probably visit more than 85%, 90% of our 156 group members each year. We don't sample our group members because our group members aren't all managed. None of them are managed by us, unlike a forestry management company who've got standard systems. Each of our managers has their own approach, and in order to ensure that the group's, you know, fully compliant, we therefore feel we need to visit our group members virtually. We certainly visit every manager each year. In some cases, they've got multiple forests with us, and in some cases there may be no activity, and so it might not physically warrant a visit. But as I say, we probably visit the vast majority of our group members every year, which is generally a physical inspection. And we tend to sample parts of UCWOS each year, which is similar to how the certification bodies work. I mean, each year with our certification body audit, the 156 woods, that tends to be about 11 to 12 group members which are selected for sample by soil association, and they tend to pick different forests each year based on the type of woodland. So whether they're more, broadleaf, they don't necessarily split by community, but they do split the woodlands by how significant the designations may be on the woodland, and whether they're predominantly broadleaf or mixed forests or coniferous. So yeah, that's about all I think I could say right now, but I'm quite happy to answer any questions.
Great, and on that note, I think we will go straight into our question session. So first of all, I think I'd just actually like to invite, I know Maria and Amanda said they had some questions, so perhaps Amanda, you could start us off. And I encourage any of the other participants to put your questions in the Q&A box.
Thanks for that, Paul. So as an organisation, we have a membership with small woodland owners that have woodlands. How would it work with us? Would each of our individual members have to become members of your group scheme, or could we be a group with a group? You see what I mean?
Yeah, that's exactly the problem, Amanda. I think that because of the way we work, to try to get our mind around the idea of potentially having a cluster of woodlands in one management plan. Yeah, so I mean, it's a bit like the Forestry Commission is a single certificate holder, multi-site, FMU certificate holder, and they've got hundreds of woodlands, and yet they're one certificate, but they've got common objectives perhaps within that. But it's a tricky thing. I mean, you could potentially have one management plan covering a cluster of woodlands in a geographic area within, well, depending on the geographic areas you work with. Arguably, it could be the whole of the UK. We've got owners that have forests up in the north of England and in the south of England. And in some cases, we've taken a decision as a group to enter those woodlands separately, so 2 group members. And in some cases, we've brought them in as one group member with one large forest management plan covering the 2 forests. And if the objectives are common, that's permissible within FSC, but it poses challenges to us as to how we audit multiple forests with different individuals with different approaches to how they record their forestry activity. So it's not something we've, as a group, have tried to come up with a solution for. I think it's maybe something that other people might want to do, because as I say, our group works as it is at the moment, but it tends to attract larger woodlands that are more economically viable. But yes, with the previous meeting, I mean, if there's a way of trying to find a way of clustering woodlands under one plan, and then ideally we need to have a focal point that we deal with to ensure that the various managers and the management activity that goes on in the various woodlands is all kind of singing from one hymn sheet, using same sets of records, following similar procedures for how they plan and record work and how they monitor work, and dealing with the health and safety, the risk assessment, the contractor paperwork, that sort of thing. That's often a weakness with smaller woodland owners, and I don't mean in sense of lack of understanding. It's just the fact that they're not always been used to working commercially, especially if they haven't got that kind of background. So the operational paperwork often poses problems, and the record keeping associated with that. But the actual detail that they may have about the woodland is often immense. You know, they know the woodland extremely well and what's in the woodland, and there's a lot of records associated with that. We have template management plans for the group. We don't complete them, but we produce template management plans in order to tick the boxes that UCWOS requires. And you know, quite often, well, generally the template plans that are available through you know, dare I use the term Forestry Commission, but the various guises of the Forestry Commission plan templates when there's woodland plan grant being provided. Those plans generally don't meet UCWOS requirements. There's gaps, but they're not designed for that. So we quite often receive a plan that's been approved, and we have to, you know, ask the manager or the owner to go back and, you know, produce a top up or a slight addendum to the plan in order to meet all the UCWOS requirements. So yeah, I sense there's probably more work that might be needed in ways of looking into how you can cluster, you know, management, a bit like well, I don't know, there was, you know, the schemes that the Forestry Commission have run in England, where they try to get these kind of woodlot type ideas for accessing undermanaged forests, where they get a group of forests in order to make the contract more attractive to a contractor. But that was aimed at trying to bring woodlands back into management rather than bringing them into certification. So yeah, there's no immediate solution that we can offer.
Yeah, so I think that was the ward forester type approach, wasn't it, that they looked at in Devon?
Yeah.
So what do you see as the barriers? Because all of the, if you had a geographical cluster, a lot of those woodlands obviously would be owned by different types of owner and under different, and some might be leased and some might be owned. What do you see are the main barriers and problems with that as in itself?
Well, it's trying to get lots of different people to agree on a common objective. I think that's the biggest challenge, really. If they're all part of one management plan, and we've never really tested how the overarching aims and objectives of one management plan would be used or audited against by, say, Soil Association, the certification body that we're certified by, and whether they might pick holes. Then it's, you know, owner A seems to be majoring a bit more on that objective, and owner B is, you know, focusing more on something slightly different. But it's that starting point, really. If there is a common approach, and then how then is work organised between the different owners and managers? How do we keep track of that? Because we're potentially then having to deal with, you know, any number of contact points, and that's where it's a little bit awkward trying to think how that would impact on our time, and therefore then cost in terms of perhaps membership of a cluster. That's perhaps the difficulty. I mean, I don't know whether it's better to have a small woods group scheme. It may be, as an organisation, you're more likely to attract funding, or potentially we could attract the funding as well. But you know, with what we charge, we find we can get by on this kind of loose fee structure that we have, which rises with hectares. You know, effectively, the commercial forests, I mean, whatever they pay, it doesn't really have a great impact on their budgeting, because the timber volumes that they're selling vastly outweigh the sort of minor cost of certification. But once you're getting into smaller ownerships, and particularly those that are probably, you know, under 30, 40 hectares, then any costs going out is going to have a major impact. And especially with the, you know, average size of small woodlands, they're not cost effective in that sense to manage commercially. So yeah, support seems to be required for that, I think.
Thanks, Paul.
Great. Maria, would you like to share any of your questions?
Yeah, so I was just kind of along, it's not really a question, it's kind of a just following on from that, really, I'm kind of thinking about I think, yeah, I agree with Paul that I don't think area-based or regional clusters are likely to work for us because of this great disparity in the types of the reasons for management and the size and the types of management. But I'm kind of thinking more along the lines of, if we were to go down the existing groups as a cluster, is forms of management. So group people together in their reasons and the why, you know, and the levels of management and the intensity of management. Possibly either that or the size of the woodland. So I think there's quite a bit of work for us to do, is to go back and scope out kind of our members and then look at where it would best fit, and then, yeah, as you said, maybe and hopefully talk with Paul and talk with Andy as well about what's the best way to do it, because I think we've come over the last couple of years, we've come quite a long way from going, yeah, we think it's a good idea, but we don't know how it would work, to get to a point where we think we want to actually do a pilot to see on the ground whether it will work. So we want to test what's the best way of doing this now for our members. And I think this is kind of brought up what Paul's presentation has brought up is more questions for me to go back to our members and go, practically, what is the most efficient way of doing this? And I think, yeah, that's something definitely given me some work to do. I think I've just added about 3 things to my to-do list.
One of the things we find is that people don't like keeping records, which is always a challenge, and there's always records that are missing. And mostly what we're pursuing is a record to confirm how they comply with one of the UCWOS requirements, and that's why we took the decision when we started that we'd produce templates. So records are one issue. In Ireland in particular, what we noticed with the owners, and their woodlands were typically, I think from memory, a smaller average size, the ones that were in the pilot schemes, but they were very small. Again, cost was a barrier because in many cases they were coniferous plantations that were coming up to, you know, a kind of a clear fell age. But one of the issues there was that a lot of the owners were involved in some kind of forestry activity in their woodlands, and then there was a barrier in terms of, well, they're a worker, they have to comply with all the UCWOS requirements, so risk assessment, training certificates, and the like. And that was also a problem, trying to understand, well, if you're working in the forest, then you need to comply with all the health and safety aspects of it as well. So on one hand, you're then dealing with owners who didn't want to, or didn't feel that they should need to perhaps get competency certificates for various things, or keep the records that you might expect a contractor to provide, or for you to monitor, that should be in place. So it's quite important to kind of distinguish that whoever's doing the work within the forest, whether it's the owner, a volunteer, or a contractor, the paperwork requirements are exactly the same. There's no kind of you know, get out for the owner or a volunteer. We still need to see all the relevant contract paperwork, you know, monitoring, planning, and you know, of course the competency to demonstrate that workers are capable of doing the work, or that's some form of training. So they're all the kind of obstacles, if you like, and barriers. But I can see if there's a will, there's the potential to get a cluster together, but it's then how you kind of rein in everybody, because with multiple different types of owners, all with, you know, maybe a bit strong-willed, or they've got, you know, they major in different sort of skill sets, and then trying to control that from a compliance point of view, from my perspective, seems quite daunting prospect. Because,
and yeah, I can easily see how that is the case, because that's something that we deal with on a day-to-day basis with our members, who are, yeah, let's say diverse, because they've all got different reasons for wanting to do it. So I think, and not so much the capacity to do the paperwork and keep the records, but the consistency, if you like, when people are kind of dipping in and out as something as volunteers. So it's yeah, I think, as I said earlier, I don't think it's something that, you know, there's probably not even, you know, we're not going to get 90% of our members who are interested, but I think there's a core group that definitely are, and I think there seems to be a will now to find a way forward and to look for a way that will work, hopefully.
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to invite my colleague Owen Davies, our Forest Standard Manager, just to contribute as well to this discussion.
Thanks, Amy. Can you hear me? Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting discussion. I mean, we absolutely recognise that the financial barriers are the biggest ones here. Really, I think certainly Amanda and Maria would agree with me. Hopefully, Andy would agree with me as well, that it's not the standards we expect of people per se that are a problem. When people have the opportunity to look through Aquos, they mostly think, yeah, okay, yeah, I can do this. You know, a lot of this I'm already doing. The rest of it's within my reach. The challenge is definitely the direct costs of certification. My pipe dream for a happy future is that we recognise that small and community woods really, in many ways, are far more attuned to FSC's mission and vision than perhaps a lot of conventional large-scale commercial forests. And I think we need to celebrate and support that. And it's relatively easy if you are a large commercial concern selling timber into markets that demand FSC certification to justify the cost of certification and to recoup those costs. It's a very different ask if your motivation is not financial, if you're operating at best on a break-even basis, or you're even having to put your own money into a wood to keep it afloat. If you're not looking to churn out a lot of timber into certified markets, the whole thing works very differently then. And there's a lot that FSC has done to try to change that dynamic. It isn't just about timber. You can absolutely sell FSC certified non-timber forest products. There is now the ecosystem services procedure, so there are other potential sources of funding there, but still I think there will be a lot of woodlands for whom the numbers still just won't add up, and I would really like to see a future where we just recognize that explicitly and say, look, these small and community woods are delivering our mission. We shouldn't be expecting them to pay for us to prove that. You know, if we want to use certification as a tool to prove that they are doing that, that's fair enough, but why should they have to pay for it? So I would ultimately love to see some sort of foundation set up that could directly pay for the certification of these woodlands. But I mean, that's not something that's on the cards in the immediate future. So what can we do right now to drive the costs down as low as possible? And you know, Paul's talked about a lot of the realities. There is only so far you can reduce the costs, and for a group scheme to still be viable, especially as a commercial concern. There is currently a public consultation open on the FSC International website about the standard that governs the way forests are audited. That could potentially have impacts because there's a lot in there about risk-based auditing, about changes in auditing intensity if there aren't any site disturbing operations going on in a forest. And for some small and community woods, that might be a way to reduce the auditing burden and therefore reduce costs. Whether that's really significant enough to make a difference, I don't know. Within the current group scheme rules, there is the possibility to form resource management units under a single resource manager. I don't know whether that's something that's worth considering particularly for Amanda and Maria, but maybe also for Andy, you know, it's still going to require money at the end of the day, because you would probably need to fund various staff positions to do it. But for instance, Small Woods Association, if there are local officers, they could potentially become a resource manager for a resource management group within a larger group scheme. And then the resource manager takes overall responsibility for ensuring compliance with the standard. The individual group members can still take on do some of the day-to-day work, but it's ultimately that resource manager who has to confirm that that's compliant with the standard and sort of make sure the evidence is in place to prove that. That might be one way to go to try to get some sort of efficiencies in recording and reporting around a diverse group of woodlands. Maybe that's worth exploring further. And one other thing to consider, I mean, we do also recognise that you know, FSC's mission is not to run a certification scheme. FSC's mission is to ensure responsible management of the world's forests, and there are going to be some people for whom, no matter how hard we try, certification just isn't going to be a tool that works. So we are also potentially looking next year, and we've been talking to Amanda about this. We're seeking some funding to just be able to provide advice directly to woodlands for whom certification might not be an option, just to improve their standards of management in line with the UK Woodland Assurance Standards. So we're trying to come at this from a few different angles, but there is no denying that it's this financial barrier that's the key one. And it's trying to find ways to fund a lot of this work that's critical. I really applaud the work that Andy and Amanda and Maria have been doing to try to find sources of funding. We have tried to make some connections with large FSC members with big corporate social responsibility budgets to see if they could maybe put their hands in their pockets. I still think it's worth going down that route up to a point. But that does seem to remain the big issue that we need to tackle.